Nowadays, Pokémon games always ask you what language you want to play them in the moment you start a new adventure, and from Winds and Waves onward, the list of possibilities will be 11 languages strong. English, Japanese, French, German, Italian, Korean, European Spanish, Latin American Spanish, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, and Brazilian Portuguese. But all of that has no effect on the in-universe language, of course. While most of you watching this probably experienced Pokémon through an English lens, that is not truly the language spoken in the Pokémon world. Change your game's language and suddenly English is nowhere to be found, right? Which begs the question, what is the language of the Pokémon world? For a long time there was no answer to that question, it was just something you shouldn't think too hard about, but that has certainly changed since. That said, it's not like we haven't had some indications as to how language works in the Pokémon world since the very beginning. Ever since Gen 1, text has been present on both the Pokécenters and Pokémarts that use the Latin alphabet, as in not Japanese writing as you would expect in a region based on Japan. This writing is present in not just Kanto, but also Johto and Hoenn, all of which are Japanese-based regions, which begs the question whether Japanese, ironically enough the language the games are made in, even actually exists in universe. Further reasons to suggest it actually doesn't are of course the unknown introduced in Gen 2, which resembled the Latin alphabet and not the Japanese hiragana and katakana, as well as more text in Hoenn, which for example reads out Battle Frontier inside the Battle Dome. Now, Battle Frontier is also the word used in the Japanese game, but obviously it isn't written like that in the dialogue, using the Latin alphabet and all. And I gotta say, if you look at the contrary, as in evidence that the Pokémon regions based on Japan actually speak something resembling Japanese in universe, you find basically nothing. There are a few characters across the series that speak in regional dialects in the Japanese version of the game, like Whitney for example, who speaks in Kansai dialect, which is what Johto is based on. However, 9 times out of 10, these accents and dialects are not consistent at all across languages, and so are hard to really view as a source of information, fun as they are. In the French version of Fire Red and Leaf Green, Lorelei speaks with a thick German accent, but no one considers that a universal truth. Pokémon Masters introduced many Galar characters with British accents, but that is not consistent with the Japanese version at all, and then there is Kabu, who is from Hoenn, yet he speaks American English, while Koga, who is from Kanto, does speak with a Japanese accent. Same thing with Kalos. Every character speaks American English, and then you have Viola, who has a French accent for some reason. Just like Fantina from Diamond and Pearl, which leaves a lot of people theorizing she may be from Kalos, but trust me, that is never becoming canon, because in the Japanese version, Fantina doesn't speak French, she speaks English. To them, the theory would be that she is from Unova or Galar or basically any other area in the world, because speaking English is kind of the default thing to do if you're in a strange country. Which also immediately explains why the English writing on the Pokémart and Center shouldn't be taken as fact that the in-universe Japanese Pokémon regions actually speak English. Visit any country in the world, it doesn't matter where, and you will find signs in all kinds of places in English, even if that is far from what the local population speaks. That could just as easily explain the presence of the Latin alphabet here. Same thing with Unknown. The vast majority of the countries in the world use a language based on the Latin alphabet, and the countries that don't are usually still somewhat familiar with how it works and what it looks like. The reverse is certainly not true. As such, basing Unknown on the Japanese writing system and then claiming it started language worldwide is a bit strange, don't you think? But so, as much as I love the random accents and dialects thrown around across the series, it's hard to say they're actually supposed to be canon and should instead be taken more as some localization fun. The sole exceptions are the occasional French, Spanish and British words in Kalos, Paldea and Galar. Those occur in every language that isn't the language itself, so they should be taken as canon. However, these examples are more about short words and phrases rather than actual language, and so it appears as if the Pokémon world may actually have one core language that everyone speaks, which then locally has different phrases that are popular and used. Kinda like how British and American English are the same language but have different quirks. Kanto and Kalos speak the same language, but in Kalos they will occasionally throw in some phrases we would call French. This is further evidenced by the fact there has never been anything like a language barrier in any of the Pokémon games. There are no characters who speak a language poorly. In some games, you have just moved in from across the world, yet instantly speak the language, and the most evidence we have seen of this are the aforementioned accents and dialects, which don't necessarily point towards an entirely new language. Then again, in Scarlet and Violet, there is an entire class focused on foreign languages, taught by Salvatore, who doesn't outright say there are multiple languages in the Pokémon world, but does introduce so many words that it appears to go beyond a bit of regional speech, like we saw in Kalos for example. He also suggests students speak the local language when they go abroad, which could still work under the assumption the language is the same everywhere, but it is flimsy, I'll admit. It should also be said that Salvatore speaks with a lot of French mixed into his lessons, much more than any character we have previously seen in Kalos. However, in the original Japanese version he uses English this much instead, so that makes at the very least his own speech patterns fall under the aforementioned "not sure if we can count this as canon" banner, although his lessons focusing on multiple languages still stand. Then again, this could also be explained by broadening the idea of the regional language. I initially presented it more as a sort of semi-dialect, but perhaps the truth is that the Japanese regions do speak Japanese and Unova speaks English, but they also both speak a universal language that doesn't really exist in our world. It would at least explain how your player character can move from Kanto to Kalos and understand everything instantly. But what we have so far looked at is all spoken. Language is more than that. After all, we started this analysis by looking at written text, and that is also where we find the more interesting revelations in the later generations. The moment Pokémon started heading outside of Japan-based regions, so Gen 5 with Unova, something changed. While in-game the Latin alphabet had already kind of vanished, with Gen 4 removing the English words from the Pokécenter and Pokémart, even in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Gen 5 went a step further. The Abyssal Runes are the first location in Pokémon to feature written text in a language that does not exist. Even the Braille from Hoenn and the Unknown from Johto made sense. This was just something completely different. Now, it is of course meant to resemble an ancient language. It's not as if the game is saying this is what the language of Unova looks like, but still. The real kicker in this whole thing can be found in the anime though. During the first 4 generations, language in the anime was wildly inconsistent. Sometimes a completely made up language would be shown, as can be seen in this image from the Johto arc, while other times Japanese was used, which was then changed in localization to become either English or just disappear altogether. Not sure how that is better, but hey, it happened. Starting in Gen 5 though, this was no longer necessary. From now on, every single sign, book, poster, everything with text would be written in a fictional language that wasn't Japanese, nor English, nor even used their alphabets. While this was undoubtedly initially done to cut down on localization costs, especially since starting with Gen 5 and the founding of the Pokémon Company International, the series started to look more beyond the borders, the effects of it went far beyond mere penny pinching. While X and Y may have gone hard on different phrases in speech, it barely featured any written text. But when ORAS was made not too long after, there was a decision to make. After all, the Hoenn games did feature quite some written text that something had to be done with, and that something became following the example of the anime. Starting with ORAS, all text in universe would now be written using a fictional language with a fictional alphabet. But that isn't necessarily the same one, not at all. In ORAS, I've been told the fictional language resembles Japanese or Korean. It at least appears to be inspired by East Asian languages, which is fitting seeing as that is where Hoenn is located. That said, it is basically impossible to decipher and make any sense of it, since the games are too low resolution to make out the finer details of the super small letters. Which brings up Sun and Moon, the next games in line, and this is where things get more interesting. Alola has a completely different alphabet and written language compared to ORAS, and thanks to some better quality shots across the game, we can now actually make out what is written here. And lo and behold, this language is actually translatable. Don't ask me how, I'm not a linguist, but research shows that these texts make syntactical sense, which essentially means that the tokens used as letters actually represent something. They're not just a random collection of tokens every single time. However, if you thought that meant Game Freak actually wrote text here and then changed the font to something ineligible, Wingding style, you're about to be disappointed. That isn't the case. It is clear that they did use that Wingding style, as in, they didn't invent a language, they created a font, but they didn't use it to write actual words. We know what the letters correspond to in the Latin alphabet, but that doesn't result in a text we can actually understand. It's effectively as if you wrote a text in English with random letters and then translated it into Wingdings. Yes, it makes sense, it is translatable, but it isn't an actual text. It is, however, the official language of Alola, and that is a fact. In Scarlet and Violet, when Salvatore is teaching about Alolan forms, this exact same language or font is used on the board behind him, showing that this is in fact the official language used in Alola consistently throughout the series. And fun fact, here the text actually does mean something. On the board the following is written in Alolan. Alolan Raichu, regional variant, altar of the sun, land rich in nature. Why it suddenly translates into something here is something I'll get to soon though. Because first we have Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which uses a brand new language. This one resembles Oras's language more, which makes sense, as it is once again a Japan-based region of course. It's not the same though, and this time, uniquely to the Let's Go games, the language is actually not syntactically accurate. This does not translate to anything and it doesn't work. Very rarely an occasional word appears to be present, but from what I have been able to tell, Kanto's language as seen in these games is pure set dressing. It isn't legible in any way. Which then brings us to Sword and Shield, and this is where things really start changing. Galar has a lot of legible text used all throughout the game, much more than Let's Go, and due to the Switch allowing for a much better resolution than the 3DS, we can make very good sense of it now. And as I kinda hinted towards with the Scarlet and Violet example, this language fully works. Several times throughout the region this alphabet is used accurately. Here we have the Game Freak logo, with Game Freak actually written next to it in this Galarian alphabet, and the gym leaders also wear outfits that state either their name or their type. There is however also a lot of random text floating around that is just these characters put together in a way that is supposed to make sense, but doesn't actually. What happened in Alola, pretty much. It is worth pointing out though that it is already highly unusual for text to actually make sense when it is written in a language literally no one can understand. That Sword and Shield do occasionally include text that works is admirable, honestly. In universe, this alphabet is very interesting for another reason too. I may have just called this the Galarian alphabet or language, but that isn't really accurate. After all, this alphabet is reused in Scarlet and Violet and Legend ZA, suggesting that it isn't actually the Galarian language at all, it is the Pokémon version of the Latin alphabet. That would still explain why Hoenn, Kanto, and in BDSP Sinnoh as well use unique alphabets that resemble each other but are not the same as what we've seen before. They are the Pokémon variant of Japanese alphabets, which can differ massively per region. Winds and Waves has also already given us some glimpses at its language too, and this is an entirely new alphabet as well, which currently is hard to say something about as we don't know where it is set. The strongest rumor though is that it is based on Indonesia, which would put it in the same camp as Hawaii, i.e. Alola. Do those real-life regions use the Latin alphabet? Yes, but only because of real-world colonization. Prior to the arrival of the European colonizers, both Hawaiian and Indonesian weren't written languages at all, they were only spoken. And then when the Europeans came, they were the ones to officialize the language in the way they knew how, using the Latin alphabet. As such, it is possible that Alola and whatever this new region is called don't use the same alphabet as Galar and Paldea for this reason. In universe though, it doesn't really change the conclusion that much, which is one that is honestly hard to really pin down. It is a fact that just like in the real world, different regions speak and write different languages. The Japanese-based Pokémon regions have their own completely different alphabet from say Kalos and Paldea, and while accents and dialects in Pokémon might not be universal, Salvatore's lessons confirm that vastly different languages are spoken across the Pokémon globe. However, that doesn't answer the question how no language barrier is ever introduced, even remotely, when we see characters freely travel through all these regions. And so, the idea that there is one universal language every human on the Pokémon planet understands does feel likely. It would be nice if it was acknowledged. I mean, Salvatore's class was the perfect place to do so, and it is not exactly harmful to the overall experience of the games either, but I guess it is what it is. Who knows, maybe when we actually have Winds and Waves, we can make a bit more sense of it all thanks to that game's alphabet. But what do you think is going on in the Pokémon world, language-wise? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you're also interested in either the Mario or Fire Emblem series, you may want to check out my other channels, Beyontapedia and Nagapedia. Links are in the description. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.